Okay, so having just seen Kong Skull Island as it's going by, I figure we can talk about that for a little bit. Really, what's going on here, to my understanding, is that they eventually want to, the idea is to apparently cross over with Gareth Edwards' Godzilla and kind of give us a more modern version of the Honda production we got many years ago. And so, but until then, it's kind of hard to tell for sure if they still plan on going in that direction. But and I noticed at the very start, you can kind of tell there seems to be something going on here, because there's kind of the opening credit sequence is actually really similar to the new Godzillas. So, and then I noticed people were kind of tight-lipped going into it, but there's a surprising lack of confirmation on that. But in the meantime, sticking with this story, we have, going on the Godzilla thing, there was a lot of backlash, if you will, because a lot of people were not happy with how little we saw of him. He was always being teased, and we only really got good glimpses of him vaguely and few and far between. Well, the makers of Kong Skull Island have decided to maybe make the fans feel a little differently. So, immediately, just right off, there he is in the very opening scene. And the thing is the good thing that they did was they didn't overdo it either, because you hear that, like, you think, well, Gareth Edwards was the whole doing the teasing Godzilla thing, so to make up for that, they're going to overcompensate and just show us Kong constantly. That's not the case either, because we do have, he's in the opening scene, and then there's the long stretch where we get all the characters together. And then they do this brilliant thing where, obviously, we've seen enough Kong movies by this point, so we know that the typical formula here is to maybe have something that kind of builds us up but doesn't show anything, and then we get all of our characters together, then they all go to Skull Island, then shit goes down on Skull Island, and then eventually, after a long time, there's finally a big reveal of Kong in all his glory. The great thing about what they do here, honestly, and it works totally fine, like, I'm all for build-up, okay? Like, I understand the whole, you just kind of build and build, and then you get to a big payoff, and then it goes from there. But honestly, this movie has enough of a payoff as it is, despite this setup, where we introduce the characters, and then they go to Skull Island. Before they're even on the ground, when they're flying into Skull Island, the first thing they do is run right the fuck into it. And to put it mildly, he rains on their parade as soon as they get there. And by rain on their parade, I mean rain with hellfire. And we do have a new batch of characters here with, well, our main four are, in credit order. We have Tom Hiddleston, Samuel L. Jackson, John Goodman, and Brie Larson. And there is, like, you know, they're doing a different story, but there's certainly echoes of the other characters, from the previous three. Not going into all the sequels and the spin-offs and all that, but just those three Kong movies we know, the 33 one, the 76 one, and the 2005 one. There is like a low-lying, well, not hardly low-lying similarity between the three, with Hiddleston kind of being our leading man of sorts. Something is on fire. Our leading man of sorts, who was I think Bruce Cabot, I believe was his name in the original movie. Then we had Jeff Bridges, and then we had Adrian Brody. He's kind of like this character has never been all that fleshed out, but from any of these actors, really, as far as my memory goes. But they do have they are basically like our stoic leading man type, even though they've never really been the focus in any of the movies. Bridges probably got the most screen time of all of them and the most focus, because he was Bridges in the 70s. And then we have Denham, who was, I believe, Robert Armstrong in the original movie, Charles Grodin in the 76, and Jack Black in Peter Jackson's. That's basically what Goodman is doing here. Obviously, not the same character at all, but he's basically he's the reason they go there, and there's even the shot of him in the familiar hat and the camera, and it's basically like it's an ode to the Denham character, which is fine. And of course, we've had Fay Wray, Jessica Lange, Naomi Watts, and now we have Brie Larson, who just gets caught up in this and may or may not have a connection with the Beast. So there's definitely those familiar echoes in there, but it definitely feels more like kind of homage to those characters than trying to recreate the whole thing. And then we have an extra character in here who is Samuel Jackson, who, in that scene I was talking about, watches all his dudes get taken out, just swatted out of the sky. He goes Pacific Rim on them and grabs one and hits them with the other. And while all of this is going on, Jackson is standing at a very unsafe proximity, but he's Samuel Jackson. He'll be okay for a little bit. And he's just watching this with hate in his eyes, and you realize, okay, the Samuel L. Jackson portion of this movie is going to be a vendetta movie. He really doesn't like that Kong is just fucking his guys up left and right. And he's not going to stand for it. He's going to go on a mission to take out King Kong. And I suppose, if anybody, I mean, you say, well, that's a stupid thing to do, but I suppose if anybody is going to try to take out King Kong, I don't think anybody would question Samuel L. Jackson if he said he was going to do that. If there's like one person where it's like, yeah, we'll see how he does. He might be able to do it. I don't know. And as far as the rest of the characters here, this is one of the movie's very few weak points, where it's, I mean, we do have, this is one of those cases where the characters probably just would be unidentifiable cardboard cutouts if it weren't for the fact that the actors are recognizable. Like, where, in this little group off to the side, we have Jason Mitchell, who was Easy and Straight Outta Compton, who you also remember in Keanu, Thomas Mann, and Shea Wiggum. And they do have distinct personalities, but at the same time, it's like, if they weren't recognizable faces, I'm not so sure I'd be able to to have kept track of them. We also have John Ortiz in here, who I was really pleased to see in the opening credits, because I didn't know he was in it. It's just another one, basically another one of the suits that goes with them. Not too dissimilar from, like, the lawyer, whatever, guy from Jurassic Park. There's a similarity there. And as far as this whole thing with, I was concerned at first at the sight of Hiddleston, because he's not particularly, I think he's amazing as Loki, but other than that, he's never really made much of an impression on me that I can remember. Maybe a little bit in Midnight in Paris, but he was mostly overshadowed. And here, his opening scene, when he's like in this bar and he just messes up these dudes at a pool table, and it's clear he's supposed to be built up as like this super tough guy. I don't necessarily think of Tom Hiddleston when I think of super tough guys. But as the movie went on, he grew on me a little bit. He does eventually, for a while there, his job is just to be stoic, as we know the character in this particular, portion of the movies typically is. But he does get, like, his one badass moment with the sword, even if it comes a little late in the game. And another thing that's going on here that I'm not quite grasping is the thing between him and Brie Larson's character. I'm not sure if they're supposed to be each other's love interest, because there's like they're kind of touchy-feely towards each other every now and then, but for the most part it doesn't go anywhere and nobody really mentions it. But they have those moments where it's like, is this going to be one of those detour love stories or whatever? And they kind of just don't do it, they just kind of keep teasing it, which is better than them actually going into it in most cases, as it is here. But it just seemed like kind of a dead-end thing that would just pop up in the movie occasionally. Not to mention they really don't have much chemistry. I can't really, not to keep hating on him or anything, but I'm having trouble remembering a time when I thought Hiddleston did have good chemistry with somebody. That's probably why he's so good at playing Loki, because Loki hates everybody, so he doesn't have to worry about that. There's also a random cameo by Richard Jenkins at the beginning, which was a little unexpected, but always pleasant, of course. I felt like watching John Goodman and Richard Jenkins talk in a hallway. I felt like it was like, is this some long lost Coen Brothers movie we didn't know about? So anyway, and of course, we're set in the 70s, so we're doing the Vietnam era thing, which actually fits the story in a really cool way. I like taking that approach, and I also liked, I mean, not only did it just they kind of do the Vietnam feel in general, but obviously what's usually the one thing filmmakers immediately jump to when they're doing a Vietnam era movie, it's always the soundtrack, and it's those same songs over and over and over again. Like, For What It's Worth, and All on the Watchtower, and Fortunate Son. It's always the same ones. This one actually doesn't go that route. They actually do use a soundtrack to set the scene. And while some of them are pretty popular songs, it was nice they didn't go for the conventional ones. I especially really like the scene when they first get to Skull Island. That's a really cool scene. And it will, I think some people probably, it's really not there much at all, but I do know that some people kind of have a problem when a movie tries to bring home a message a little bit. This is probably somewhat disguising an environmental message, where it's like, if you fuck with nature, nature is gonna fuck with you back. But it does not stray. It's always a King Kong movie, like, and an awesome one at that. So there's like a little bit in there, but surely not enough to affect anybody's perception of it in that particular way. Another thing that really works here is, for being the kind of movie it is, particularly a lot more so in the first half than the second half, but still, the writing is surprisingly strong here. Like, there's a lot of, Goodman has a lot of good lines towards the beginning there. I like Shea Whigham's unconventional encounter line. And speaking of lines, you know, I just mentioned this movie actually, but, for the people who like their little in-jokes, yes, when they're prepping up to go into Skull Island, of course, Samuel Jackson says, "Hold on to your butts." It sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? But yeah, just the way a lot of this stuff is shot looks really good. I really like the shot when they first come in and we see all the choppers coming in, and there's like a dragonfly in the foreground while the choppers are in the background, and it lines up. I thought that was a really cool shot, and there's a lot of stuff in there that's kind of like that. And then there is, obviously, the one thing, there's a lot to compare here, if you want to Peter Jackson's movie. But the great thing here is that I think people that liked Peter, I know it's not like it's certainly not as unanimously loved as it was when it very first came out. And I know a lot of people have beef with it now, and that main beef comes from the fact that it's over 3 hours long, where it's like 1 hour for the boat, 1 hour for Skull Island, 1 hour for the city. Which, yeah, is probably overkill. If you're one of those people that liked portions of Peter Jackson's King Kong but thought it was way too bloated, this is what you're looking for. This is like the greatest hits album of the Jackson movie, minus Leaving Skull Island. It's called Skull Island. They don't cheat you by naming it that. And so, what Jackson had a field day with was the different creatures that are on Skull Island, because of course Kong is surrounded by a whole bunch of other crazy shit, and they really went wild with this. Some of the imagery in this movie and the creatures they came up with are pure insanity. One of my personal favorites was something I would not have really thought of, but it sounds silly at first until you realize the threat here, because, yeah, this movie has a giant spider in it. But we're not going Wild Wild West on you or anything. What the creators here, and like the visual effects artists have come up with, is that because this is a giant spider, it has 8 legs that are like giant spears that are like the width of tree trunks that are coming down at the ground over and over again as it walks. And yeah, that is it. There's some gruesome aftermath to be had. And there's also some really good stuff where we actually get this is similar to what I was praising the new Pete's Dragon for, and that is something where this movie actually gives us some time to bask in Kong in all his glory. Like, there's actually one scene where he's just, like, hanging out by him. He's being washed, but he's pretty much just hanging out by himself, and he gets attacked by a squid. And he fixes the situation, and it's, like, it's just interesting to see Kong just basically in his element by himself when he doesn't know he's being watched. And to kind of get an idea of, this is probably about what everything looked like before humans came here. So I really like that they put that little scene in there to give us kind of a bigger picture of how this is Kong's domain. And the thing here is, what else do we have? There is, but if there is one problem, it's mostly as we're getting closer to the end. Like, this movie is so incredibly close to greatness. But there are some slows. Like I said, there's some. I feel like some character strength would have worked a little better. And I know it is. They're definitely, the characters are a lot more prominent than they would be in normal movies that are this big. But it did feel that there was kind of a yeah, there was kind of a lack of, you know, I don't know. There was just, after a while, you kind of lose track of who's who. It's one of those things when there's like a big action scene. There's one in particular involving like toxic gas, and it's from then on, it's kind of like you don't really remember after you've basically kind of gotten to know the characters, mostly based on the actors' faces. It's kind of hard to tell who's alive and who's dead anymore. Like, there were a couple of times when people kept popping up, and I was like, oh, I just assumed that person was dead because I couldn't tell. But those moments are very few and far between. This is a really well put together movie, and the effects are insane. Like, I know we just had an Oscar ceremony, and stuff tends to get kind of swept under if it's too early. But I mean, it will be an absolute shame if we get another set of visual effects nominees a year from now, and this doesn't show up. This has got, I mean, they did snub Pacific Rim, which I still haven't gotten over after 4 years, but still, this is just, I mean, and not just the creatures and the way they're put together either, but also, like, when you look at Kong, it's like, in these big movies lately, it seems very normal for, it's like the visual effects team almost half-asses it, or like they don't have enough time to put it all together, or the director doesn't care enough to push them to get it together more. You can really tell how meticulous and detailed all the effects are here. It's one of those cases where when we see Kong, especially up close, particularly in this scene where he's fighting the squid off of him, it's almost like you just by looking at him, you can get a really clear idea of what his fur would probably feel like, which is really cool. I didn't see it in 3D, so I don't know if that has any effect, positive or negative. It was only, the 2D version was only 5 minutes after the 3D version, and of course I would choose the 2D if I can. But I imagine sometimes it works okay. Every now and then there's something clearly like being thrown at the camera, sometimes by surprise and stuff like that. But overall, it looks really good and it works really well. Also, another character I forgot to mention, I don't know how I forgot him either, is John C. Reilly. And I was kind of interested in his character here because, from what I understood, like, as soon as he showed up in the advertising, the comparison everybody was making was Dennis Hopper in Apocalypse Now. It was like John C. Reilly doing Dennis Hopper in Apocalypse Now in a King Kong movie. Yeah, I'll go for that. And I think some people, there was some concern that he might be kind of overused comic relief, but weirdly enough, his character has like the biggest arc in the movie. So he's actually not just the comedy relief. He actually adds like a whole other layer to the story and characters and stuff like that. Like if all the other characters were as well thought out as his, this movie might have been able to peek over into greatness. But it's still incredibly well made. I loved Peter Jackson's movie when it came out, but I haven't seen it all the way through since. I've seen it like probably 3 times in parts since then. But I'd go as far as to say, since the original, this is probably the best Kong movie we have. I know the bar is not very high, because the Bridges movie isn't very good, and the Honda productions, are what they are. The Bridges movie had the sequel, King Kong Lives. I think most of us know how that went. So the bar's not high when I say this is probably the second best Kong movie ever made. Honestly, it's been a long time since I saw the original. Maybe they're on par, really. All I know is this is really, really good stuff, but I'll have to revisit those down the line now that I've been reinvigorated with the Kong phase. So yeah, this is really good stuff. I'm sure it's Sunday, so I'm sure you've all seen it by now, but yes, but if you haven't, this is definitely, like I said, the bottom line. If you liked Peter Jackson's movie, but you wanted a little less of it, this is exactly what you're looking for. This is all the good stuff. With a strong cast at the head of it, and just mind-blowing effects. Really, really good stuff. Those skull crawlers are freaky as shit too. So, really, yeah, okay, that's kind of another problem I kind of had, was it's clear they could possibly be leaning towards going into the Godzilla universe, the one we just had. The climax of this movie feels very much like the same climax as Godzilla, like the same structure. But regardless of that, it still stands on its own really nicely, and I loved like the period detail, the whole Vietnam era thing. Like I said, the writing's surprisingly strong for a movie like this, and just the whole thing. The thing that pleases me the most is just how huge it all felt. Like, this feels like a really big spectacle movie, and with so many like big budget, big effects movies coming out, especially in the superhero era, we're all kind of numb to it by this point. But this is the first movie I've seen in a while that just felt like really, really huge. Like back when blockbusters were blockbusters, So that was really pleasing too. So yes, that's what that is. I'm very happy I saw this. So obviously there'll be another Versus on Friday, whatever that is. I'm probably, I don't know. It's interesting to get. I don't know if movies are just better now because I have to pay for them or what, but I'm probably going to go see Beauty and the Beast on Friday afternoon. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. I'm not optimistic, but maybe it'll surprise or something. Maybe it'll be another Jungle Book and not another, Branagh Cinderella or Angelina Jolie's Maleficent or whatever. But hopes are low. So, and I'm not an Emma Watson fan. That doesn't help anything. But that's what you have to look forward to if you're still hanging around. In the meantime, I think that's about it.